I love Mike Hanson Archives.
Are you ready to run?
This is Mike Hanson, and this first tape, part one, is going to be by David Thibodeau, Waco fire survivor, and I think it's one of his best speeches that I've ever seen. And this was from 1995, the Waco, the final assault. And this actual videotape, the original, came from Wyla, a good friend of the Branch Davidians' estate when she passed away. The estate was actually passed on to Clive Doyle, and he couldn't handle it, so he gave the estate archives to me, and I'm trying to go through them and get everything put on the internet that she's collected over practically her whole life about Waco and other subjects. But Wyla, I met Wyla in 1995 along with Catherine Madison when they moved to Austin, Texas. And then, of course, they started bringing all their Branch Davidians onto our TV shows, which we had Access TV shows at the time. Myself, Mike Hanson, Jeff Davis, and then later on Alex Jones. And that's how we got involved with the Branch Davidians, which are great people. And I've never been as mad as hell when I found out I had been lied to about the whole situation at Mount Carmel. And then later on, of course, we got a volunteer effort together to rebuild at least the church there at Mount Carmel, which was a great time in my life. I loved doing it. And so here it is, folks. This is by David Thibodeau from 1995. And this is a great presentation, David, if I say so myself. It really taught me a lot about what happened to y'all out there. And then we're going to have part two, which will be from 1996.
April 19th, the day of the fire, when one of the tanks ran over the phone cord, and while they're CS gassing us, there was absolutely no way for us to get in contact with them. Just one of the many tactics. That tape is particularly powerful for me. A little bit later on, David starts talking about America and how this is no longer, if the authorities, the federal authorities have the right and the power to come on to our property and put tanks around and start shooting at us, and then make us look to be the aggressors, then obviously that's too much power. And it's time for power balance, and you all know the outcome. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to pretty much focus on April 19th and the events of the fire and the amount of the CS gas that was used. And what I'm going to try to show is that the fire was calculated, the fire was thought out, and that the fire had nothing to do with the people on the inside, as the government has claimed and the media has claimed over and over that it was Koresh and the people inside that planned and set the fires. One cult deprogrammer, Rick Ross, you may have heard of this guy. He was the deprogrammer, if you will, the cult authority that the government was working with, actually said that we had been planning a fire for 6 months, and that was part of the religious teaching. And I would like to know what study he sat in on, because I lived there for 2 years and I wasn't privy to any study like that. And for a person who's consulting the government to get up in a public forum and say that we were planning something, he's talking out of ignorance and out of deceit, and he doesn't know what the heck David Koresh was teaching. He doesn't know what David was presenting, and he doesn't have any right to say the things that he did. as well as some of the federal authorities, Jeffrey Jamar, the 4 or 5 separate lies that I can place him in, as well as the ATF commanders, who every day at the press conference during the 51-day siege changed their story. The ATF story changed every single day on a daily basis. Absolutely changed. And then later on it was found out that the raid planners were guilty of trying to cover up information for the government. The 2 raid planners in question are Konyaki and Sarabin, and they lost their jobs, and they were going to take the ATF to court, and what they wanted to do is they were going to subpoena some cellular phone conversations between Washington and the on-ground commanders at Waco. And as soon as the government found out they were going to subpoena these phone conversations, they gave them their jobs back with back pay and took care of all their legal expenses, which indicates when they started to point higher up, those people who are higher up didn't want to be targeted, and the people in power that have the power to take positions and give positions gave them their positions back, despite the fact that 87 people died. Despite the fact that they were wrong and that they lied consistently and continuously, not only throughout the siege, but to this very day. And despite the fact that they got in front of Congress and on the stand and hostage rescue team member and the federal coordinators literally lied. I know it's not politically correct to say the word lied, I should say fabricate, but you know what? When I've been lied to the extent that I have through my experience, I'll call it what it is, and I'll call them what they are. These people don't have the honor, and I say if they don't have the honor to uphold the oath of office that they took in public service and the oath that they took to law enforcement, they don't have that honor, they don't deserve their positions. And if a federal agent gets on the stands and lies, they shouldn't be walking around. They should be in jail for perjury. They lie with impunity because they have complete immunity. So remember that. And you can bet that if I get on the stand and lie, I would be in jail right now. And the fact that they're not shows the unjustness of this judicial system, of this federal government, of this immense power that this nation has established to pervert the truth and to control the people and masses through something called the propaganda model, which they have down to a scientific, to a science, and they utilize consistently. I have a tendency to talk a little bit too long, so I'm going to move right into the slideshow presentation now and the events that occurred on April 19th. For those of you who were here yesterday, my talk focused on yesterday. The subject that I was talking about was the untold story of Waco, and basically I was building up to April 19th, talking about meeting David and being introduced to the group and starting the studies of the 7 seals, something called the 7 seals that at first I really had no interest in. Then once I started to get a little deeper, and it became the most fascinating subject that I've ever come across, and it changed my life. It changed my life because I was actually studying every single day as opposed to just playing and working and trying to get by. And once I started to study, I started to find out that once you have a concept of God, He will provide for you. Even if you have to go through hard times and hardships, those hardships are to mold you, and those hardships are to make you new, and those hardships are to bring you through the next test to come. So I feel fortunate in the sense that there is a bigger test. Let me put it this way. Waco was my personal tragedy. But I feel that we're headed for more personal tragedies that everyone in this room is going to affect one way or another. And I think if you're even in this building, if you've even cut through all that the press has said about the preparedness shows, we got blasted pretty hard in Denver. They tried to say that it was a militia meeting and not a preparedness expo, and they came out and the press found that there was all these people with herbs and freeze-dried food and clothing and first aid kits, and it was like, wow, they didn't really expect to come come to an herbalist meeting, I think even more so than a patriotic meeting, which just shows the range and the scope that Dan and the preparedness shows here are trying to cover. And that scope is complete preparedness for whatever event, natural disaster. But I think that we understand the underlying depths a little better, and that it is not the militia and the patriotic movement to be feared. The patriotic movement and the militia movement, which is put into play as a defensive technique to be used against this extreme power, just outrageously out of control. But it was put in a defense, and I don't understand why the government doesn't realize that we're not the radicals, but that they are. When they have a tank and they drive it onto someone's property, and they go in with 75 to 100 armed agents shooting in a building, that they are the aggressors and not the people that are being oppressed. And that's something that we're going to focus on here today. Okay, so I'm going to move right along now. Is there a way we can get the backlights off here? It's the backlights that I really need off the most. This first picture, it's going to be hard to see, but I'm going to try to describe it a little. It's this is a dark picture anyway, but this is the BATF raid. This is the initial raid when they're coming out of the cattle trailers and assaulting the front of the building. And I talked about that yesterday, so I'm not really going to go into that today. Okay, there's a picture of the building, Mount Carmel. This, as you can tell, is during the siege. This is the day of the fire. Please note that the tanks have gone around the building in circles consistently throughout 51 days, and they've cleared all the vegetation, and they've cleared anything that is burnable away from the building, and they've built a fire break around the building. I think that's pretty plain to see. We burned our field off at one point. We had to clear a segment around the area that we wanted to burn so it wouldn't spread. Same principle here, fire break. Okay, yeah, this is really hard to see, but this building here, this is called a mag bag, and that's a building that we were renting about 2 miles away from Mount Carmel. And this building is where Michael Schroeder and Peter Hipsman would work on cars. We had David Koresh had a vehicle rebuilding company, and basically they would take old Mustangs and especially Camaros and rebuild them. And it says, there's an interesting story with this building. During the raid, the government found out about this, and they went down there with a tank, and they called the guy that owns the building. It's not even our building, and said, "We need to get into your building down there to find evidence." And they said, we're going to drive the tank through the door. We're just going to nudge the door to get in. He said, "Don't do that. I'm on my way down. I'll bring the keys. I'm coming right now." By the time he got there, the tank had gone through the front of his building, totally destroying it, and out the side. And they got what they were looking for. They got their evidence. They found 4 whole shotgun shells, casings. So there's their evidence. And the guy shows up with his keys to find his building destroyed. And on the building, on the front of the building, after it was boarded up, it says, "ATF and FBI knows how to lie." And then it says, "Destroyed by the U.S. government, ATF and FBI joint venture," is what it says on the building. Obviously, some militia radical wrote that on the building, right, folks? Okay, this is the picture. This is pretty interesting. This is one of the pictures done by one of the children who exited the building during the 51-day siege. And they drew a little house, and they had the rainbow, which is a symbol of God's word, that God's word is true. And on the little house, they started to take a crayon, and they went like this. And they started, dot through the roof. And the psychologist said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, that's bullet holes." The children's own testimony, and I have a videotape. This one here is called Inside Mount Carmel. And these are interviews with the people on the inside of the building, and they're talking about what their experience was during the 51-day siege. Okay, it's about 53 different people are interviewed, including the children. And they talk about where they were, what happened to them. And there's one kid in particular, Isaiah, who talks about his experience with cowering on the floor while the ATF were shooting into the building. and after it was all over, finding a bullet between the rug and the floor by his feet. That's how close he was to being hit. And it's pretty powerful to hear this from a kid. I think another thing I want to mention about the siege before I move on is the fact that one of the BATF groups was to go to the front of the building. One was to serve a search warrant that they didn't even have. They said later got shot up on the dashboard. And the other group was to go and suppress the dogs that were in a penned-up area of the building, in the front of the building, Alaskan Malamute fawn and her 4 pups. And the first thing they did was shoot these dogs, murdering them. One of the dogs, Fawn, ran around in a circle for about 3 or 4 minutes, yelping before one of my very best friends, who is no longer with us, Greg Summers, had to put her out of her misery. And it was Greg that raised these dogs from pups. It was very hard for him. Can you imagine what it was like for the children on the second story listening to their dogs being slaughtered in the front yard? This shows our frustration being cut off from the press and just having to listen every night to the news and hearing how we're being presented as just these crazy, radical religious idiots. So finally we actually put on a sheet, and Cliff Sellers, who was one of the most talented, gifted artists I'd ever known in my life, quickly put this on, and it says, FBI, God sees your lies, back at 314. We put probably 5 or 6 different messages during the siege out for the people and made the front page every single day, but this was one of the ones because we were so upset listening to the stories being manipulated. And here's a quick example of one of those stories. One of those stories is revolving around a guy named Michael Schroeder, who was down at the Mag Bag that day with 2 other people. They heard about the siege. They heard that Mount Carmel had just been attacked and shot at, and they wanted to get back into the building. Mike Schroeder had a young son in the building, and he was trying to get back into the building. 6 o'clock that evening, a news report comes on. Well, it was actually more around 7 o'clock, and the news report said at around dusk this evening, 3 armed cult members, quote unquote, exited the building, all guns blazing at federal agents. 1 was killed and the other 2 were taken into custody. That's how it was reported in the press, and we're walking around asking different people, who left? Let's take a tally. Did anybody actually leave the building, and why? No one had left, so we couldn't really understand this till later when we found out that Mike Schroeder was found dead. He was shot 6 times. He was shot trying to enter the building to the side of the property, and he was found on a fence where his body was left for 3 days before they saw fit to remove him via a helicopter and a meat hook. He laid there, and the report is, the government of course reported that he had a gun, but one of the ATF agents, was reported later, landed a helicopter next to his body and took the gun, and then was never heard from again. So that was their story. I think my story would be that he was an unarmed man that had a stun gun on the inside pocket of his jacket that was found, trying to enter the building to his young son, and they reported it, that he was exiting the building, all guns blazing, like we were some kind of fools and idiots and just absolute zealous, crazy, lunatic, religious freaks. So, who's in charge of the propaganda? There's Jeffrey Jamar and Dan Conroy of the ATF. Jeffrey Jamar, of course, was the special agent in charge of the FBI of the entire Waco fiasco, if I may call it. Jeffrey's retired now. I don't know if any of you have seen him on any reports or on any national shows, but he's not looking very good these days. He's got some white hairs, and he's looking like he's been put through the ringer. And I guess that's what happens when you consistently lie to the American public, continuously, and then have to live with yourself after. I'm going to give you an example a little later on when we get to a specific slide. I'm going to talk about one of the lies that I heard sitting in a jail cell that just angered me beyond all belief. So let's not forget this face. There's one of the motorcycles that was run over by the tanks. We had on the property a trailer load of motorcycles, about 12, and part of our punishment for not coming out was the tanks tipping the motorcycles over and running over them. This was a trailer It was a trailer owned by a German woman, about 70 years old. Her name was Trudy. This was all that she had in the world. It's her little trailer she lived in. During the siege, the tanks ran over it, splitting it in two, making it look like a sardine can that you just cut open. She was 70 years old. She's still alive today, but she has nothing. Okay, this is pretty interesting. This is probably around 10:30, 10 or so. We see the tank. He's pulled around to the back of the building, and he is now entering the corner of the gym area. Now, please remember, there was a media blackout on the back of the building, so no one got to see this going on. All you saw was the front of the building. You saw the tanks go in the front, but you didn't see him destroy the building like this. And we're going to see, as the slideshow progresses, the amount of destruction that the tanks wreaked havoc on this building, knocking it off its foundation like it was the site of an earthquake, which is another subject I'm going to talk about in relation to the fire. I live in California, and many Californians know when you have an earthquake, you get a lot of fires scattered throughout the city. No difference here. Okay, he's almost fully into the building now. He's pulling out. The whole corner is gone. The rooftop has just collapsed, and now he's going to try to drive a, I don't know, 10, 15-ton tank onto the roof. Let's see what happens. It didn't fare very well, did it? I guess the roof isn't going to support this tank. So there's the big hole from trying to drive onto the roof, and the debris. And there's a little better picture of the destruction. Now, while they're driving their tanks into the building, we have a loudspeaker on the front. Remember, we have no negotiation with them because they cut us off at this point. They ran over the cord. And they're saying, come on out. This siege is over. You're under arrest. Come out with your hands up. Now, I challenge the most physically fit person in here on a good day, without the 40-mile-an-hour winds that were prevalent down in Waco, to walk out of this hole where the tank has just come into, over all this debris, into the camp of at this point, the camp of the enemy. So when the tank goes through your front door, I think any kind of harmonization or any kind of friendship or even mutual respect is over. And we see the tank at the front of the building, starting to enter the building. One of the things Jeffrey Jamar said at the congressional hearing was that at no time did any two tanks enter into the building. Only one tank at a time ever entered the building and exited the building. I couldn't understand why he was saying this, because originally they said that no tanks ever entered the building at the back. I couldn't understand why he was saying this, because we have a picture right here of two tanks in the building at the same time. I mean, we have the pictorial evidence from their own surveillance plane flying 2 miles above Mount Carmel. Would that constitute perjury? Again, there's a tank in the front. That's the infamous tank, the infamous Linda Thompson video with the flame-throwing tank, which again is not a flame-throwing tank. That tank exits the building, and the building doesn't start burning for another 30 to 40 minutes after that tank exits. And if you see the uncut video footage of this tank from the ground exiting the building, you see the tank as it pulls up a hill, you see something reflecting the sunlight on the turret, and it looks like a flame. It's one of the greatest optical illusions I've ever seen, but nonetheless it is an optical illusion. And please, I want to put to rest for once and for all that is not a flame-throwing tank, and that Linda Thompson did a good thing in the sense that she incited enough people to open their eyes about Waco, but she did it with only 60% truth. And that's a tragedy. That's why this movement, if you will, gets discredited. That's why they can have a Nightline presentation and play these audio tapes that have been digitalized and brought up in the government studio, saying that the people inside started the fire, and not have anyone there like myself or some of the fire investigators that we have hired to counteract what they're saying. That's why when I was supposed to go on Larry King Live, I was canceled for Sharon Stone. It goes to show the amount of this control once again. Anyway, 2 tanks in the building at the same time. That is not a flame-throwing tank. More destruction in the back. Okay, now he's doing a little more in the front. You can see, and I don't have a pointer, but over to the right-hand side, the front doors are collapsed into the building. And please note that there are two double doors at this point. Two doors. The trials in San Antonio, one of the doors was entered into evidence, two steel doors, and the other one was not. When the defense attorneys asked where the other steel door was, the government said, oh, that must have disintegrated in the fire. Obviously covered up evidence. It's not going to send as a steel door, and the door right next to it is thoroughly intact. Now the reason they said this is because later on Jack Zimmerman, one of the attorneys that went inside during the 51-day siege and saw the doors and saw the bullet holes coming through the doors, said that the majority of the bullet holes were coming from the outside into the building, indicating that the initial assault, it was just this, it was not the ATF propaganda film that you have seen where there's 6 or 7 Koresh members waiting at the front door and just open fire, but in reality, it was the BATF agents firing into the building with this, an amazing amount of firepower, which, by the way, killed Perry Jones, who was a 60, 70-year-old man, unarmed man at the front door, shot him in the stomach. The autopsy report, by the way, says that Perry Jones was killed in a shot to the mouth. We believe that Perry or someone there put Perry out of his misery because Perry was screaming all the way down the hall and he was asking to die. But nonetheless, that's the only wound that is shown on this particular autopsy report is the wound in the mouth. They said that nothing was wrong with his stomach. And we got the guy on tape in the background screaming because of a stomach wound. So again, there's an autopsy report that has been tampered with. Mary Bell Jones didn't want to bury the body for some time because of this. And basically that's just one more aspect of an autopsy report that has been covered and has been tampered with. Okay, the fire's begun in the left-hand corner. I need to talk about something before I get into the fire, though. The amount of CS gas that was used in the building that day is criminal. Now, CS gas is a gas that is banned internationally. When we go to war with a country, for example, Saudi Arabia, we're not allowed to use CS because it's a riot control agent to be used outdoors according to the manufacturer's handbook on CS gas. Never is CS gas to be used in an indoor controlled environment, particularly because it will kill young children and women with smaller respiratory tracts that can't handle this gas. Anyone in the military that has had to go into a tear gas, chances are, into a tear gas booth, chances are that's CS gas, and you will know the effect of the CS gas and how it burns your eyes, your nasal cavities, your skin. The amounts that were used that day, the means of gas delivery during the assault, and what I'm quoting here is a failure analysis report. Failure analysis was a scientific community that was hired to do the report on Waco. Basically, they've investigated the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion and the Oklahoma City bombing. These are people that the government has worked with in the past, people that can be respected. And it says here, 40-millimeter ferret rounds were launched from conventional military M79 grenade launchers by personnel inside 5 Bradley fighting vehicles. Each ferret round contains 3.7 grams of CS dissolved and 33.25 grams of methylene chloride. Methylene chloride is the propellant to spread the gas throughout the room. ISPRA Protojet Model 5 anti-fog ejectors mounted to the booms of 2 combat engineering vehicles, or CEVs. A CEV is basically an M60 tank with a boom replacing the main gun. 4 ejectors were mounted on the CEV-1, while 2 ejectors were mounted on CEV-2. Each Model 5 ejector M5 consists of a pressurized bottle containing 30 grams of CS dissolved in 1,070 grams of methylene chloride and 700 grams of carbon dioxide propellant. Total gas delivered in 4 different gas assaults on Mount Carmel that morning were 20 M5 bottles and 366 to 386 ferret rounds. A ferret round is a 40-millimeter shell fired into a building. It is barricade breaking. It'll go through windows, sheetrock. It'll go through your head if you get hit by one. And one of the reports from the inside is that Jimmy Riddle got hit in the gas mask with one of these ferret rounds. I saw one personally embedded in a wall. They're supposed to be plastic, so they'll break upon impact. The one that I saw it looked like it was stainless steel. It had one body on the front, and it was attached with 3 fins on the back, about maybe a little bit smaller than a Coca-Cola can. And I studied it for about 10 minutes because at the time I thought it was very significant. I didn't think I was going to live to tell about this particular bottle, and was quite shocked when I exited the building and wasn't shot, but I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So 20 M5 bottles and 366 ferret rounds were delivered, approximately 1,900 grams of CS and 33,000 grams of methylene chloride. It also says that CS concentrations in the kitchen and dining room areas, which is where the kids were approximately 9 times that required to deter trained soldiers. 9 times. Why didn't y'all come out? Next slide. The fire's pretty much raging right now. The front, and you can see the back is engulfed. The area that I came out of with about, Jamie Casillo, Derek Lovelock, and Clive Doyle and myself. There's a big hole that one of the tanks made in the building. You know, and as you saw the tanks go into the building, they made like 2 or 3 major holes in the front. You can see here, I'm going to show you something pretty significant right here. One of the booms tore the corner off that building, and it's really interesting where they did that and why they chose the second story. They tore the corner off because that is where the hallway begins that goes all the way down the length of Mount Carmel. Where do you think the wind was blowing from that day? From this direction to that direction. See the flames? They're moving that way. What happens when you have 40-mile-an-hour winds and you put immense holes in a building through every corner, destroying the back of the building totally? You get an oxygen flow through the system, conducive to burning the place up like that. I had friends that had spoken to fire investigators and fire marshals, and they were watching this the morning of April 19th, and they actually said to their friends and spouses that were close by, the government is going to burn that place down. You don't put holes in a building like that if you're anticipating a fire. And that's fire marshals. Anyway, you can see the amount of holes, the amount of the destruction, and with 40-mile-an-hour winds, that flame is just whipping down that hallway, and I'm going to talk about that. I actually want to talk about that right now. Where I was in the building during the last day was right down here in the chapel area. And what happened was I was sitting there listening to the radio, and we were listening to the Ron Engelman show. Ron Engelman was head of patriotic radio station. He was the only person that we could tell that was even somewhat sympathetic and on our side, that was in the press, and he was simply saying that no matter what Koresh is guilty of, we treat prisoners of war better than we're treating these people. We haven't even given them medical supplies or any kind of doctor to go in there. He wanted to go in. He had a plan to go in with a film crew and some surgeons that had volunteered, and the government, of course, would not allow that. But he had James Tabor and Phil Arnold, 2 of the theologians, on during the siege, and we would listen to them. And out of that came the first sealed manuscript that I have a copy of at my booth. I also want to mention really quickly, I've put together an information packet. It's my congressional testimony, the letter that I wrote. A lot of people ask me about Carrie Jewell, who was the young girl that was in Congress saying that she was molested by Koresh. You need to read this letter from her grandmother that she wrote to Congress that was never covered, that basically says the amount of time Carrie Jewell was claiming to be living in Mount Carmel, she was living in Anaheim, California with her grandmother, and that her story doesn't jive. So I think this is an interesting letter people need to know. Back here at the very end, I have an 8-page letter from Jack Zimmerman, the attorney inside, and he talks about what he saw, the evidences of the helicopter fire through the ceiling, as well as the missing door and the amount of gunfire that was coming into the building. Very interesting letter. Anyway, I heard Ron Engelman, he was saying you know, you guys got to come out, they're not going to stop this. David, please come out. And he cut to a commercial. When I heard the commercial said, it was a newscast, and it said, the Branch Davidian compound down in Waco, Texas is being, I can't remember, was it assaulted by the FBI. Janet Reno has okayed a tear gas plan. Of course, they didn't say CS gas plan. And the building is being tear gassed, and the FBI have received over 80 to 20 gunshots on their CEVs, but they're claiming that they have not fired back into the building. Now, when I heard that report, my jaw dropped, because I was sitting in the cafeteria the whole morning, not the cafeteria, but the chapel area that I pointed out right down here the whole morning, and I was watching people reading their Bibles as the tanks were coming in. We weren't stupid. We understood that a .223 round isn't going to penetrate an armored vehicle. And I was shocked. My heart sank in my chest because I knew right then that we were being set up for a massacre. Till that point, I still had hope. When the government said that they had received over 200 gunshots on their CEVs, between 80 and 200, I knew that that was, again, the last lie, and that we were being set up for a massacre, and it was over. I mean, there was no hope of establishing negotiations at this point, and up to that point, I was still hopeful. Now, I'm not saying that someone may not have fired from the other end of the building, and maybe I didn't hear it. That's a possibility. What I'm saying is I did not hear any gunshots the whole morning, which is why I was so shocked when I heard the report that they were receiving fire. Again, it was the last lie to the American public before the people were massacred. Just another shot of the hole in the back with the smoke. And again, this comes from the FLIR video, which is the infrared video. And that video was taken from a plane, a surveillance plane 2 miles above Mount Carmel. These are the color still photos. Someone was up there snapping pictures with color still, and that's what the slideshow presentation is. Again, there are the two tanks, one at the front and the other one just exiting the back. Again, two tanks entering the building at the same time. As Jeffrey Jamar said at Congress, only one tank at any one time ever entered. Thank you. The two tanks. That's actually a really good picture of both tanks in the building at the same time. Mr. Jamar. You know what? I'm going backwards. A different angle, and again you can see the hole that I came out of better here. Note the corner of the building taken off by one of the tanks, the boom, of the destruction in the back. There's a tank at the front of the building now, as the place is pretty much gone. I'm going to back up a little. Now, after I had heard this report, during the course of the next hour, the tanks stepped up their activities and were pushing more gas. They would actually come up to the building and spray in the CS gas by the M5 bottles. Someone yelled from the upstairs, and I was down here again in the church area. Someone yelled that there was a fire upstairs, and that's all I had heard. And I was shocked with this. At this point, I was thinking, oh my God, where's Serenity? Where's Isaiah? Some of the children? I hope they're being put in the underground bus. And we had a bus that was buried on the far side of the building, right over in that area. And the plan in any emergency was to get them to the bus. So the front was destroyed. The front staircase leading to the second story was destroyed by the tank, so I had to go to the back. And there was another staircase that led upstairs to the second story, right to where David Koреш's room was. And I got halfway up the staircase, and you could see by the destruction there, I could see the door to the second story, but I couldn't get to it because of the amount of debris that was facing the door. So what I had to do is I had to crawl up on David Koреш's bedroom floor, which is right here. And I had to lift myself onto the floor. And I had to go through all this debris. There was glass, and it took me some time to maneuver through his room. And then I came into the next adjacent area, which was an office space right here, and there was a catwalk that led over the roof of the chapel area. I mean over the rafters, not over the roof, but over the rafters of the chapel area, to the second story. And I took that, and I got to the second story doorwell that led to the second story of the front of the building, and there was a curtain there, a blanket, and that was our door, because we were still constructing Mount Carmel. And I opened the blanket, and a big black dust of smoke came at me, and I had to move my head back so not to get hit with it. And as the smoke dissipated, I went to stick my head into that hallway to get in there, to get to the kids, to make sure they would be put in the bus where I felt they'd be safest. And a wall of flames shot down the hallway in front of me. And that's the only way I can describe it. And it was one of the loudest sounds I'd ever heard in my life. And my hearing's a little damaged anyway from being a drummer all my life. But there was just no way to describe the sound. It was amazing. You couldn't hear anything else. I couldn't hear any screams, nothing. And so after that, I knew that I couldn't get into that building. I knew I couldn't get in that segment. And I went back the way I came. And I ended up downstairs. And at this point, there was smoke everywhere. I took my jacket off, and my black leather jacket was peppered with all these little white spots from the CS gas. I took the jacket off, because it didn't matter at that point. It was incredibly hot. My gas mask wasn't even working at this point. I took that off, and I was on my knees, and I was praying. So I thought, this is it. And I was just praying to God. And the wall to my right-hand side caught fire, and it singed the side of my face, and I could hear my hair burning. When that happened, I looked up and I saw Jamie Castillo and Derek Lovelock go out of the hole right there, and I followed suit behind them, thinking no one's going to make it out behind me. And I walked up the roadway. I got stuck in there was some mud here, and I got stuck in it. So I was so disoriented. Once I got unstuck, I started to walk up. I got about to the end of the edge of the building, and I turned back and I saw Clive Doyle coming out of the building. Actually, it was even before that. It was like right after I got out of the mud. I turned around and saw Clive come out. His arms were smoking, and he was patting him out. And as I walked up, we were told by the speaker systems to walk down the side of the road, and I got halfway, and I turned back, literally to see Mount Carmel. I'm going backwards again. Mount Carmel just literally ablaze, like this. That's a pretty good depiction. I'm about halfway up, and I turn around and I see someone fall out of this window. It was one of those windows, and that was Marjorie Thomas, I found out later. And she didn't even seem to jump. It was almost like she didn't want to go, and she just kind of slid out of the window and did like a 360, 380, and landed on her back. And then you just turn around, and it's all like a movie. It's like, you're looking at one scene, and the camera pans, and you see this scene, and the camera pans back. That's just, it was all in slow motion. Rennis Abraham, by the way, had another problem with the Linda Thompson tape. That's not a government agent on the roof. That's Rennis Abraham. I was in his jail cell later, and we spoke about this. And he couldn't take the fire anymore. He got out on the roof, and he didn't want to go down to the FBI thinking they were going to hurt him or shoot him. And he told me later, he was waiting on the roof to be shot so it would end quickly. And then finally, when he wasn't shot and the flames became too bad, he jumped down and walked away. And again, that's not a government agent, as Linda Thompson says. I'm sorry, Linda. That's Rennis Abraham. So he walks away, and that was the thought that I had too. Coming out of the building, I didn't want to exit the building, but I felt at that point better to be shot in the head and go really quickly than to burn to death. And I walked out, and to my surprise, I kept walking. We're going to talk a little more about this in a second. I'm going to have to hurry this through. You can't see this very clearly. It's a segment of the building down here. You see a figure? Now, that's Ruth Riddle. Now, Ruth Riddle exited the building, and then that was the one that the government said one of the cult members, quote-unquote, exited the building and then ran back into the building. And an FBI agent had to grab her to save her life. Now, she exited the building and she saw something that was more fearful to her than the fire, and that was the federal agents. That's her again. Notice the debris over here, by the way, and I'm going to show you a picture later of this razor wire that they put around the building. It's no wonder she went back into the building. There's the razor wire. They surrounded the building with that. I wouldn't want to fall in there. Oh, by the way, Misty Ferguson, an 18-year-old young, incredibly brave lady who survived the fire. She lost all her fingers, and the gas mask melted to her face. She said later to her mother that she tried to go to one area of the building and jump out, but there was so much debris against the building that she couldn't, so she had to go to the other side of the building, and that's when the floor caved in and her hands went down the fire. Here we have a picture of a tank with 3 FBI agents, and notice their backs. It's really hard to see. Linda Thompson, again, I hate to bring this name up, calls these flamethrowers. They're not, they're oxygen tanks, and they have oxygen masks on. Now, the government had no fire plan. They had no fire plan whatsoever. Why are these agents equipped with oxygen tanks prepared for a fire? Why did they have an infrared video system in a plane 2 miles above Mount Carmel if they were not anticipating a fire? Here's an FBI agent. He just walked out of the house across the street, and as you can see, he's posing for a picture in front of the building burning, the burning building of Mount Carmel, like it's some kind of trophy picture. Now, Jeffrey Jamar said on a national, on one of those national evening programs, that this was a malicious attempt to demonize the government, that he was not posing for a picture, but he happened to walk out and happened to turn around and someone snapped his picture. I do not have the other picture, but I have seen it and I'm trying to get it. We have a picture of the head FBI negotiator, Byron Sage, in the very same spot, in the very same trophy picture, posing in front of the burning Mount Carmel. So I would like to testify and contend to what you said on the national show, Mr. Jamar. You know, it's really interesting. The FBI looked at this thing all wrong. You got the negotiators, and we saw this. They did a special on the negotiations, and they showed the FBI negotiators sitting in their trailer, and they had a picture of David Koresh on the wall. And they're sitting there, and I can picture this, for 51 days, frustrated with this guy. They just want to go home. And they're looking at this guy every day going, that's the enemy, and we have to kill him. We have to get rid of this guy. We have to bring him into custody and punish him, or just do away with him. That's the enemy. Now, we sent them out, again, this videotape, the Inside Mount Carmel tape of the different people and different children, and they said in their Justice Department report that they didn't give this to the press because they felt it would cause much sympathy and support for the Davidians, which obviously they couldn't massacre us if they had this sympathy and support of the people, right? They had to totally control the media and propagate what they were doing in Waco, which was mass murder. That's what they said, consistently. You know, all I can say is the people's testimonies are a little more powerful than that. Anyway, there are 2 pictures in existence of this particular trophy picture. There's the fireball, the flame ball. At this point, I'm at the first ATF, the FBI checkpoint. They got me down on the ground. They got my arm strapped behind my back. There's an agent coming down in front of each of us, and he's saying, you know, where are the women, where are the children? You have to live with us for the rest of your life. Where are the kids? And I looked at him and I said, they should be in the underground bus. You guys know all about it. You should go there. You know, that's where they should be. And that agent with a notepad looked up at another burly agent. He had a black mustache and he had a firearm in his hand. And he looked down and he said, oh, we tear gassed that bus. I was just thinking, you tear gassed that bus. Not only did they tear gas it, but some of the reports indicated that the debris, when the tanks went into the building, actually landed on top of the trapdoor leading to the bus, so no one could get to the bus, and there were a couple bodies found near that trapdoor, apparently trying to get in. Building's almost gone now. Okay, plenty of water. Where are the fire trucks?
How come I see no fire trucks at this point? Plenty of water supply to put on this fire. No trucks. The place is almost destroyed. That, by the way, if you remember on the tape, David Kurz is talking about a property being destroyed and a custom El Camino that cannot be replaced. That's the custom El Camino. They're using it as a park bench now that they ran over. That's part of what I was talking about, of this destruction. Here the agents are hanging out in the back, watching the building burn. There's the destruction. There's one fire truck up at the very end. If you notice, it's an old pumper. Just showed up on the scene. You're a little late. It's a tank in front of the burning building. They're waving the American flag. And if you recall, once the place was totally destroyed and burned to the ground, they put the American flag, the state of Texas flag, and the BATF flag on our flagpole and flew those flags like it was some victory, like they had just conquered some country. And now we finally see the fire trucks, and again you see the Paul Faddis El Camino. We have one fireman with one stream of water putting out the ashes. Incidentally, the fire trucks and ambulances were on hand, and they were told to stand down a few days before the fire. And they're viewing it on the screen, Mount Carmel burning, and they finally get a call, and they're saying, well, Mount Carmel's burning. And the fire officials are like, yeah, we know, we're watching it. Well, you better get up here. They get up there, and they're held at the first checkpoint for 20 minutes, where they're allowed to go on. Now, what do we have here? Really interesting picture. There's a tank pushing debris back into the destroyed, smoldering ruins. There's no excuse, no need for this tank to be doing anything. They said they're containing the fire. For what? There's no vegetation. They built a fire break around the building. What's he doing? He's destroying more evidence. They destroyed the evidence of February 28th, the helicopter fire. They destroyed the building. They destroyed most of the witnesses. And now they're continuing to destroy the evidence. The original plan was once we exited the building, the Texas Rangers would take over and have their investigation. The Texas Rangers were held off the building for a complete 24-hour period after this place burned to the ground. Why do you think that is? Do you think you're being told the truth? Do you think there's not evidence being covered up? Why do we have a missing door? Why is there no video footage of the ATF raid from the very first minutes of it? They had camera and surveillance equipment set up across the street. It was the greatest raid in law enforcement history here in America, and they had no cameras. They said both cameras malfunctioned was their excuse when the FBI asked for the videotape of the early segments of the raid. And then they said that we met them with fire, that it was an ambush. If that's the case, why is there all this missing evidence? You know, our claim is Koresh went to the door, held his hand out, said, hold on, there's women and children here, and was shot at. Of course, there's no evidence of this, is there? Isn't that convenient? There's a close-up of the tank pushing debris into the building after the place is destroyed. There is no excuse. There is no need. That is a criminal act. They're destroying evidence. They're getting away with it. And they're walking around. These people are walking around, still working for this government. The Ron Horiuchis of the world who killed Vicki Weaver and incidentally was at Mount Carmel. We believe him to be in one of the snipers' nests, though we can't prove that yet. Why aren't these people locked up? They are criminals. I always have to pause when I show this picture. I believe Janet Reno was lied to, number one, though that is not a defense. Because Janet Reno, that is her job, is to be the chief law enforcement personnel of the United States of America. And for Janet Reno to get up on every syndicated talk show the day the place burned to the ground and say, I stayed up late all night trying to worry about how we would save the children, what we would do for the kids. I thought everything through. I tried to make every possible conclusion. I drew every conclusion that I possibly could. Figured that this tear gas plan was the best way to go, and that we were using the most harmless form of tear gas available because I was considering the children. CS gas, Mrs. Reno, is not the most harmless form of of tear gas you can use, but it's probably the most deadly. It's the worst thing you could have used. And she still to this day, and the government to this day, have their experts on there saying CS gas is a harmless form of tear gas. When the Israelis know that you don't use CS gas in an enclosed environment, and they are not allowed to under international treaty because of its harmful effects. Can't see this picture very well, but after we went through all the checkpoints, they took our clothes off, they videotaped our naked bodies, they gave us these orange shoots to wear. I was walking, I'm the second person, you can't really see it. There's Jamie, myself, and Derek Lovelock being escorted by the marshals down there in Waco. There's the bus that we had. Now, I don't have you can't really see it very well, but the front of the bus is destroyed, and I sat there and watched the tank ram the bus head on and move it about 100 yards back to the other side of the property. If you notice, the windows in the bus are totally destroyed. That is not from the tank, that is from the FBI and ATF agents going onto the bus and destroying the windows with the butts of their guns. See this kind of anger and hatred? And to me, some of these ATF agents that I have seen, you know, they would drive by the tanks and boo us. I don't know why these people are so bitter. You know, I guess they were trying out for the National Football League and couldn't make the cut, so they became government agents. I'm not really sure. But when you take an oath of office, you don't take it out on the citizenry of America, and you don't take it out on the international community that existed in Mount Carmel. A third of the people at Mount Carmel were black, and they were from England. A third. They were originally trying to call us racist. They didn't understand that we don't see skin texture, but we believed ourselves to be beings of light and not black, white, red, or yellow. People from Australia, England, I just blanked on the rest of the countries. Mexico, we had people from all over the place at Mount Carmel. In my opinion, pretty much the world was represented at Mount Carmel. And what did the international community do? Was there any uprising? No, they bought the government line that we were a bunch of kooks and freaks and probably deserved to die, and worked with this government, and there was nothing done with the community of the world to alleviate this tragedy. Where's the ACLU? We're a church group with firearms, therefore we don't deserve any rights. Where are these people? You know, it's interesting, there's a scripture. The scripture says, the merchants of the great men of the earth, and through the sorceries they will deceive many. And the television set is one of the greatest sorceries known to man today. It's the biggest method of control. And that's how they get away with their murders. And another scripture that I think is equally as powerful. In Psalms it says, why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast their cords from us. When in the history of the world has there ever been an event where literally all nations had an interest in something and all conspired together against one person and one group of people? Now, I'm not trying to preach to you, I'm not trying to sell you, I'm not trying to convert you in any way. I'm simply trying to show a very, very basic scripture that I believe in and that I see to be a direct relation to Mount Carmel. But you have to understand that there's Genesis to Revelation, and every prophet talks about this. And it takes a couple weeks to get an understanding of the first 4 or 5 seals. So obviously I'm not going to get into that with you today, but I just wanted to make a point. Again, Trudy's trailer, which is destroyed. Another angle of Trudy's trailer that's been run over, the 7-year-old lady. Here are 4 gas tanks that we had next to the building that were tipped over by the FBI tanks. Gallons and gallons of fuel were poured onto the ground and spread out all over the place. And guess where that was? That was right in the area of the building. You can see this is the side. Remember the side that I came out on? Can you visualize that? That's where these tanks were. I saw them poured out onto the ground and then moved back by the tanks. They said at the trials in San Antonio that Jamie Casillo, Clive Doyle, and David Thibodeau all had fuel on their shoes, trying to show that we set a fire. They didn't tell you that we came out of the area where these gas tanks had been pushed over and the fuel had spilled onto the ground. No, they made it sound like we set the fire intentionally. This was our water, our well. They destroyed that after the fire. They put everything into 3 big piles, just like the Oklahoma City bombing. You know how they destroyed the building? They destroyed Mount Carmel after. That was the concrete structure where the majority of the women and children were found. Most of them literally cooked to death. They went to the only place they could go to escape a fire, and that was in this structure, because it had survived the previous fire. All the kids, they were put under wet blankets, incidentally, according to the autopsy reports, according to Dr. Rodney Crowe, who did a lot of these investigations, put under wet blankets to escape a fire. We did not commit suicide. We did not commit suicide again. We had no plan to commit suicide. We wanted to survive. We wanted the 7 Seal manuscript to come out and come to light. That was not allowed. Then they destroy our well and destroy the standing concrete structure and put in a big pile of concrete. That was the pool and the debris in the pool, and that's what's left today. A pile of rubble. That is Mount Carmel today. Conveniently burned the building down, kill the witnesses, and destroy the evidence.
Gotta get it. Okay, hi Sheila.
How you doing? Hi.
25th anniversary
Yes,
of what
I know,
happened.
sir.
How are you?
Yes, fine,
Right
thank
here.
you.
Tell them to come on down. They still got
Yes,
time. It's
yes,
live.
It's still time.
Yeah.
Okay. Good
And
morning.
what do you think
How are
about
you?
the 25th anniversary, real quick, before we go
Sorry
in?
that it's still 25 years. I'm sorry that it's still taking so long. We want to get home. We want God to come and change all this.
Amen.
We don't have to think about
Absolutely.
people being dead.
Yes.
You know.
And look at all this food you brought.
Yes. Well,
You
thank
got everything?
Yes,
Well, we
I
still
think
got
so.
time to get here.
Okay.
April 19th,
No, it's just plain bread.
2018.
Okay.
What time is food?
12:30, 1:15, whatever, 1 o'clock.
All right, come on, park your car and come on in.
All right, then,
All right,
thank you.
thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye
All right,
now.
folks. Hello, folks. This is Mike Hanson here on Mike Hanson Archives on YouTube and here on my Facebook. And we're here at the 25th anniversary of the memorial service here in Waco, Texas. And we got Clive Doyle here. Can you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on the 25th anniversary here?
It's
It's all right. Everybody knows you.
it's kind of hard. My daughter just died.
Now, that's what I heard, and we didn't put it out on the internet because we were asked not to. This is the first time people out here on my.
A lot of them don't. A lot of them don't know yet.
That was your first daughter died at Mount Carmel, and this was your another daughter.
This is my oldest daughter. It's my youngest that died in the fire. And Karen was coming down, had her plane booked. She was coming down for the memorial. And ended up dying in a head-on collision. A drunk driver. People up in Pennsylvania saying that it was deliberate, it wasn't an accident. Tried to run a cop off the road first. I guess the cop avoided it. Tried to run down another woman and she avoided it. Karen was third in line. So they say she died instantly, which is at least she didn't suffer too much. But seems like every year there's a few more to go.
Yeah, it's just not many left. Clive, I'm so sorry for all the stuff that's happened to y'all, and hopefully it will get better. But you, like you always say, it's going to be better.
It'll get worse before it gets better.
Well, but once we're gone here, maybe.
Well, you know, KRLD called me this morning, Well, what do you think the government's learned in 25 years? I said nothing, except don't have the press there filming everything.
How are you doing?
There's Desi. Okay, well, we're getting ready to start. Who do you got speaking this year?
Phil Arnold, James Tabor, I believe, Catherine Wessinger, Mary Winborn wants to say a little bit.
Good. Oh, I can't wait to see her.
So there's a lot of people.
All right, well, we're getting started here, folks. I hope y'all can make it here for the 25th anniversary.
This morning and coming to see me. This is early for me, so I'm sure it's early for a few of you. I'd like to thank Dan from the preparedness shows for having me down here and giving the experience of having such a unique place for people to come and not only learn about survival techniques and preparedness, but find out what is going on politically in the nation today, the truth of what's going on politically in the nation today, and not the watered-down version that you get on the television set. And actually cutting through some of the media bypass and figuring out what is really happening out there. It's so important. I'm not going to waste much time. As most of you probably know, my name is David Thibodeau, and I met David Koresh back in '91 at Guitar Center in Hollywood, California. I was late for a band rehearsal that I had. I was living out there in Hollywood. I had moved from Maine, and I was going to music school, and I wanted to become a famous rock and roll drummer. And so I walked into Guitar Center because I didn't have any drumsticks, and we had a band practice, and there was David Koresh and Steven Schneider, and they were in the electronic drum room, and they were looking at an electronic drum set. And I walked in with a pair of drumsticks in my hand, and they said, "Well, are you a drummer?" And I kind of looked pretty obvious. I said yes. And they asked me if I would sit down and try this electronic drum set. So I did. I played for 5 minutes. And when I got up, they approached me and asked me if I was playing in a band. And I said at the time that I was, but I was always looking to play with other people. They gave me a card. And I took the card and I looked at it. It was a yellow card. And on the front it said Messiah Productions. I turned the card over, and on the back it had all these religious scriptures. Zechariah 14, Isaiah 2, Micah, Malachi, and I'm reading all these scriptures, and I just kind of smiled to myself. I've been living in Hollywood. You get approached a lot in Hollywood, but a lot of different groups and a lot of different ideologies, and it wasn't anything that I was looking to get into at the time, so I handed the card back to him. And I said, "Well, thank you, but I'm really not looking to be in a Christian rock band right now, nothing personal." And they were like, "Well, we're not really a Christian rock band." And then they started to describe their experiences. Steve actually started to talk about going over to Hawaii, living in Hawaii, and having this young man come over and start to present some things to him from the scripture, and politically things that were happening at the time that coincided with what Steve had already understood in the scripture. And this was the person, Steven Schneider, incidentally, was David Koresh's right-hand man, as the federal government kept calling him, the second in command. Steve was a teacher of comparative religions at the University of Hawaii. He guest lectured a course at the University of Hawaii. So here's a man who studied his whole life the different scriptures of the world so he could have an understanding of really what book was the Word of God. What was the closest direct link to God that we can get today, the actual words that he gave through man. And I'm not going to get up here and preach to you. I'm sure everyone has their different views and philosophies and theologies, and that's fine. That's what America's all about. And I think more people need to come to that awareness that that is what America is all about when they make a judgment on Waco. And they see the television set every night, and they hear cult, and they hear cult members, and they hear cult leader, and they hear child abuse, and they hear sexual abuse, and they hear these words over and over and over and over and over again.
and they make their opinions based on what they're being fed. Okay? In other words, I don't judge you for whatever church you go to. And I am always being judged, and the people in Mount Carmel were judged before the siege even began by certain people. And then the early aspects of the siege, I think people remained pretty open. Toward the end of the siege, most of the people in America just wanted it over. Anyway, it would get over. They just wanted it over. And that's a tragic mistake, is tolerance. We're lacking a lot of tolerance in this nation right now for other people's views and ideas, just as the Nazis lacked tolerance for the Jewish ideologies. And we know what happened with that. People get real upset when I make this comparison to Nazi Germany. But if you start to look at the laws and the amount of laws, the 666 crime bill, all these different federal government laws that have no place in the state of Florida, in the state of California, in the state of Maine, in any individual state, they have no place with these kind of laws. It's exactly what Nazi Germany did. Hitler, once he came into power, passed law after law after law to gain control of every aspect of the people's lives. Normally, what would not have been a criminal act became a criminal act, especially under the Nazi Germany gun laws, which are almost parodied by the gun laws we have today. It's pretty scary when you actually start studying the documentations that have come down and how we are utilizing history. This government is utilizing what the great totalitarians of yesteryear have done to control you and to control me. And that's one of the reasons that we have to come to these and become aware and listen to different speakers. I do tend to get a little sidetracked from time to time, so I'm going to get back to my original story. So I got to know David pretty well and some of the people out there and what they were presenting. I was fascinated at first, just the way that David and Steve described their answer when I said, "Are you guys Christian?" And then they started to talk politics, which really surprised me. Now, some of you may have seen the ATF propaganda film that came out, In the Line of Fire. It's a propaganda film. There's that little scene where David Koresh and some of his followers are out front of the church, and they're going, "Brother, Jesus saves, brother. You got to come to our church," and they're handing him out all these flyers and stuff, and basically witnessing to the people coming out of the church, and then just walking by like they're freaks. That never happened. David never ever did that. David was not that stupid to stand on the street. You would never have his voice heard in the street like that. The way he did it was from a theological standpoint. He would sit down with an individual and spend hours and hours and hours, weeks, days, months, sometimes years with certain people. To quote David himself from one of the tapes that I'm going to have available. He never did that. And that's what impressed me, is that I wasn't approached in that way. I was approached in a way of reasoning. And then when we started to open up the scriptures and they started to get into it, they would come over for studies, and I would see Stephen Schneider had one of those wide margin Bibles that you can't get anymore, the inch-thick margin. And he had everything cross-referenced. Every single page had a different reference on it and was filled in the margin. And I was so impressed with that. This guy had taken so much time to thoroughly go through the scriptures. And the way they would present a study, and I'll give a quick example, because people have to understand that there was truly a theological aspect of what happened there. That is the way that we were viewing the world. That is the way that we were viewing reality, was through the scriptures, the reality of scriptures. And I will say, incidentally, that before meeting David, I was not a believer. I always thought that I was on a spiritual path of some kind, but I always thought that the Bible was kind of outdated, like most young people today believe, that the Bible was a fantasy book, that these things couldn't have possibly happened, and that, basically society has just been molded into this way of thinking, this fantasy to control people. I have since learned from meeting David that the scripture is the deepest book that I could ever imagine being in existence. And the more that I study and the more that I see the prophets coincide with each other and that they're saying the same story, and that each one has a little bit greater depth to it, and that every tree, every lineage, every person, every word has a meaning in that book that is deeper. The word "the" means something deeper when you're talking about Scripture. And then it becomes a reality because you start to see truly, and your eyes become open, and you walk into a Walmart, and you don't see things the same way. You don't just see little toys, but you see little toys geared for war. You see little planes, and you see little monsters that you can buy for your kids to gear society around the future events. The future events that are coming up, as Daniel says, the time of trouble. In the latter days, there will be a time of trouble such as never been since the beginning of time. If we are truly at those latter days, then there are some very hard days ahead, some very dark days ahead. You're not going to leave here with a smile on your face. I'm not going to give you a good feeling like you would when you go to church and you pay your tithe. This is reality. This is truth. And this is what we have to start talking to our neighbors about is truth. No more Christmas, Halloween, Easter. No more Santa Claus. No more lies. No more looking at Peter Jennings or any of those anchors and believing everything they say just because they're an authority. It's lies. And there's lie upon lie upon lie. And we're going to talk about some of those lies right now. Two important events that occurred before the siege even started to take place that we need to talk about. There's a lot of important events, but we only have time for a couple of them, so I'm going to have to streamline. One of those events was the health and welfare people. In 1993, I believe it was, or 92, late 92, early 93, somewhere in that area, right before, it was about 5 months before the BATF attack in February. So I guess it was 92. The health and welfare people from the state came out to investigate all these accusations of child abuse. There was a man named Mark Bro who lives in Australia. He was a former follower of David. And he left. Right when I was coming in, he had already left the group. And I remember David being so bitter over this guy leaving and always talking about this Mark Bro and how Mark was his best student and how David loved Mark. Couldn't believe that Mark would leave and just like say all these things about him. And the guy was shaken up about it. For the first 2 months getting to know him, I kept hearing this name over and over again. And at the time, I just wanted to play drums. The guy was a great guitarist. When I met him at the Guitar Center that day and we practiced a couple weeks later, I was blown away with his talent as a guitarist. He had like a progressive style like Steve Vai or Joe Satriani. I don't know if any of these names ring a bell. They're electric guitar virtuosos of the day, kind of like Mozart's were in their time, only on guitar. So David played like that kind of really technical style, and he would take a lot of psalms and talk about the final plan, the final message for the final generation of mankind going out through music, and something called Shigionoth, which meant music to turbulent lyrics. And all the songs talk about music. King David, it was written about by Solomon in the Psalms through inspiration about King David's trumpets and horns and playing skillfully to the Lord with a loud noise is one of the Psalms. And of course, this is our interpretation of the final message. Of course, there's a lot more scriptures that talk about this final message, which I'm not going to get into. But the Shigionoth, music to turbulent lyrics, a music that will go forward and wake people up or make people ask questions. And that's what David wanted. He didn't want to have a big siege and have, what do they call it, satellite city fixed on us for 51 days. That's not how we want to get the message out at all. We want to do it through music. So people would hear a song called Seven Thunders and come up to David after the show and say, what's Seven Thunders all about? Well, why don't I show you? And he could open the scripture and we could get into it. I think this would have been really been in history instead of having parties after the shows that had Bible studies. But you can guarantee that if we ever got to the point where we were touring, there would be a Bible study in every city. Because that's what David was all about. He wanted to enlighten people. He believed that he had a message, a final message, an important message. And he wanted people to understand this basic foundation. So this Mark Bro started to really stir up the waters for us. He started talking about David sleeping with all these children. He started telling stories about him having to go on guard duty. Mark Bro's 90% blind in one eye, and almost, he's legally blind in one eye and over 60 or 70% blind in the other eye, okay? Here's the guy talking about having to stand guard, like Koresh would ever let someone that's blind stand guard. Does this make any sense to you? It made no sense to me whatsoever. But this was Mark Bro's report, that he had to stand there with a firearm, and stand guard. Mark Bro also used to talk about rollerblading down hills in San Francisco and going swimming and having sharks brush up against him. This is, again, please understand, this is a guy that's blind. Now, Mark's not stupid, he's brilliant. He's got a photogenic memory. That's why he was David's best student. And he had learned all this truth, all this information, which then he decided to present and get his own group of people. I could talk about Mark for quite some time, but I'm going to kind of move on here. Mark did start, I have to say this one thing, and this is a story that not too many people realize. David came to a point in his message when he used to talk about an upper room and a lower room experience, and that there would be a new light to be given in the future that would be the dividing point of anyone who was truly sincere within the group. And then there would be the upper room, those who went up and would study with David, and probably the lower room who would probably study with Mark. What ended up happening is the new light came, a new aspect of the message was revealed, and Mark left the group at this point. And Mark did everything he could to turn around any people who had been involved and left, especially in Australia. And that's when they started to get all these people together. That's when they started to really demonize Koresh. And Mark actually made the statement in a letter that I read, "I will do anything to stop you." If you read his book, and please don't buy the book. If you want to read it, please go to the library and get it. It's called Inside the Cult. But in his book, he actually discredits himself. The gentleman says that he knew that there was no... This is the person, remember, that was originally reporting there was child sacrifice. Not only child abuse, but child sacrifice going on at Mount Carmel. And because the newer babies that were being born didn't have any birth certificates, because they had, they weren't involved in the system, but they were being sacrificed. He said that to the FBI and the ATF, and in his book he says, "I was frustrated because the federal law enforcement agencies weren't going to get Koresh, so I told them that there was child sacrifice going on, so it would anger them enough to finally take action." This is what the man says in his own book. This is the person that the government went to for information. This is the person's testimony, his eyewitness testimony, legally blind in one eye. His eyewitness testimony that film, that ATF propaganda film in the Line of Fire was based on. This is the reality that the government, the media, Hollywood is painting for you. It's their reality. It's their fantasy. It's not true. It's not the truth. So in 1992, due to all this accusation, the health and welfare people came out and they investigated the children. And they looked them up. They looked them down. They looked for signs of mental, physical, and sexual abuse. And they dropped their case for lack of evidence. Basically, all they had found were some marks on one of the baby's bottoms. Not even the baby, one of the younger kids, like the 7-year-old's bottoms, because the kids there were disciplined. And they were disciplined always out of love and never out of anger. And if a parent was ever angry at a child and ever would hit the child, David Koresh would come down on the parent hard. Because there's a difference between disciplining your children, as it says in the scripture, and beating a child. It was presented that we beat children. That's what Janet Reno said. The kids were being beaten. If you remember her justification the day the place burned to the ground. She was asked about the place burning. Her only justification was that the kids were being beaten. Then she couldn't even back it up. Let me tell you what this is called. When there's a volatile situation, and all of America is watching a television set, and they're getting angry because they have something out of their control burning in front of them with women and children in it, one of two things happens. They get angry enough to take action, or they look for a justification. And what the government does is offer you, and the media and the television set offers you the justification, so you don't get angry enough to go down to City Hall and take action. And that's what they did. And you will see it again and again and again. Hence, the kids are being beaten. That's why I went in. Oh, the kids are being beaten. Well, it's terrible what happened to the kids, but those people deserve abusers. And that's a justification. You can live with yourself. Tell you what, if you come down to tomorrow's lecture, there will be no more justifications. And there's a documentary coming out that's going to be called, of course I'm going to forget what it's going to be called because it's so new and it's not even out yet. It'll come to me. It's coming out by William Gazecki and Mike McNulty that you need to look for. I think it'll be out in late July, and there's some pretty heavy evidence on this documentary. It talks about the February 28th raid. They have a lot of specialists, and they're going to be doing a lot of work with the FLIR video, the infrared video that was shot from a plane above Mount Carmel, 2 miles above Mount Carmel. And that infrared video has some pretty interesting things going on at the back of the building that I can't speak about publicly yet. But let's just say, I'll tell you what, I'm going to come back to this because this is really a sensitive area for me right now. So the health and welfare people came out in '92. They checked the kids. They found no signs of abuse, and they dropped their case. They came out with the sheriff's department because they were fearful for their lives because of all the things that were being said in the press against us. And Koresh talked to the sheriff's department. Koresh knew the sheriff personally. Koresh had been in trouble before in '87. And when the sheriff asked him to come in, he got in his car and went downtown. Freely. All he had to do was be asked. And he was there. I wish the BATF would have realized this and asked as well. However, they didn't. So the sheriff came out, and the next day in the paper, the health and welfare people actually said in the Waco Tribune Herald, they said that the kids were the nicest, most well-behaved kids we've ever had the pleasure to work with. And then right next to that quote, one of the people in the sheriff's department said that the only problem with those people out in Mount Carmel is not that they're weird or strange. Their problem is that they're misunderstood. I thought that was pretty powerful coming from the sheriff's department. And I wish these things would have been mentioned before the BATF attack. Soon after that, some individuals moved next door, or I should say across the street, into a house. There were 2 houses across the street, and they were owned by the person that had the adjacent property. His name was Perry. He was a cattle farmer and a big, huge ranch. He's one of the people that actually ran Waco. And they told our Perry Jones, was David Koresh's father-in-law. He had lived through all the different groups that had come to Mount Carmel. The Rod, the Branch, Brother Roden, Sister Roden, Benjamin Hoddeth, all the way through time. And he lived there most of his life at Mount Carmel, and Perry knew everybody in the city of Waco. And the other Perry, the Perry that owned the property across from us, had told our Perry Jones, that nothing was going to be done to that property, that he was going to use it as servants' quarters. And all of a sudden, 4 young guys move in across the street. They looked like they were in their mid-30s, mid to late 30s. And they move in, and they carry in all this equipment. They don't carry in furniture or anything like that. They have these big, huge equipment cases. And then they start playing golf, and they start shooting their firearms on their property, doing target practice and stuff. I guess basically to let us know that they were into firearms and things. And so David sent over a couple people with a 6-pack of beer and some pizza. We used to make pizza runs, and we get this pizza because Perry knew everyone. We would get free pizzas and stuff and food from the community of Waco. So we brought him over pizza and some beer, and the story has it that 2 of the individuals, I think it was Greg Summers and Neil Vega, knock on the door at the undercover house, and you hear this voice from inside, and the voice goes, "What?" "Oh, we're your neighbors across the street. We have some pizza and beer for you. We just want to say hi, welcome you to the neighborhood, introduce ourselves." All of a sudden the door opens, his hand comes out. "Thanks." Grabs the pizza and pulls it in, slams the door, and they're sitting there like this. "What's going on?" And the guy from the inside goes, "I got my girl in here." "Okay, no problem. We'll see you later." But, I mean, the arrogance, "What? Thanks." This is how, they chose to deal with us. Anyway, like a day or 2 later, one of the main guys comes down the roadway, and he's checking out a piece of bit and invited him in for studies. So he and another agent came over that night and were getting some studies. And the study went over the agent's time, apparently. He had a certain time limit. And this other agent came from the house. I can call them agents now. At the time, we didn't realize they were agents. We were giving them the benefit of the doubt, even though I think they need to polish up on their surveillance skills a little bit. But anyway, they walked down, and the guy knocks on the door, you know, because it was like 2 hours had gone by. David tended to give long studies, especially to someone new that was interested. And Robert would sit there and, you know, be reading the scriptures. There's a knock at the door, you know, and, oh, Robert, your friend's out here. And David opens the door, come on in. And I go over to the door to see what's going on. The guy's outside pacing back and forth in front of the door, trying to figure out what to do. He's just pacing. He didn't want to come in. You know, he thought it was a setup or something. So, like, come on in, man. Come on in. So finally he comes in. Is everything okay, Robert? You know, we were supposed to go out. Oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry about that. We just kind of got into a study. Everything's fine. And then they left, you know. It was just, we were all looking at each other going, that was pretty interesting, wasn't it? You know, trying to blow it off. Anyway, to make a long story short, they told us that they were going to TSTC, which was a community college in Waco. I guess the reason I'm taking so long to frame this story is because I want to show you the incompetence of the ATF if you haven't already seen it. I want to show you kind of how they think, how their suspicion and their arrogance and their pride gets away with them, and how they feel that they're doing this. I guess they feel like they're protecting us. I'm not sure. They didn't do a very good job of protecting the people at Waco, that's for sure. We're going to get into some stories a little bit later about that, too. So they tell us they're going to TSTC and that they're studying philosophy. That's what Robert says. So what are you studying out there at TSTC? He goes, oh, philosophy. Now, TSTC is a community college for trade, wood shop, cars, you know, these kinds of things. And so I said, really, Robert, you're studying philosophy out there? When did they have that course? You know, I was fascinated. Apparently they were registered with the other college, so they didn't even have their colleges down. So it got to be almost comical. If it weren't such a serious situation, it would be comical. And so, of course, Robert Rodriguez, his name is, said later in the congressional hearings that I was mistaken and that he told me photography and that I was mistaken and heard it wrong. He never said philosophy. Well, Robert, I beg to differ because when you said philosophy, my mouth dropped. You know, there's certain things in your life when you hear, you just never forget because you can't believe the person's actually saying it. There's a few events that I'll talk about it concerning the Waco incident. This is one of those. I just couldn't believe he was saying it. So I know that I didn't say photography, and I know that I said philosophy just to clarify a little bit. And I wish I had a chance in Congress to retort. I wish that they didn't cut my time and put Carrie Jewell next to me, and we're going to talk about Carrie Jewell's testimony as well. The young girl that claimed that she was abused, who was reading off a written statement according to a grandmother that was written up by her stepmother, and was reading verbatim word for word. When you're a young lady, and I've talked to a lot of young ladies that have been sexually abused, it's something that I hold. The evils of man I've studied all my life. The evils of society I've always had a great interest, fascination, and sadness for. And so I've talked to a lot of people in my life about their experiences with especially sexual abuse. And the one thing that pretty much consistently most of them tell me is they don't need to read off a piece of paper when they describe their experience because they know it. They don't need to have something prepared. And I had prepared something. I prepared a two-page sheet for Congress. I got right here. It's a part of my information pack that I've put together with different letters from people that were involved. The students is David Koresh. This is a letter to Walter Smith from the head jury forewoman saying we don't want these people to be doing 40 years in jail for a charge that we threw out of court and was added back in by the judge. One of the attorneys that was on, Jack Zimmerman. Anyway, I did a two-page little letter that I was pretty proud of. You know, one of the only letters I've ever actually written in my life. I'm writing it to Congress, you know, and had an impact. I said, well, it's pretty well written. You know, maybe I should maybe I should quit drumming and become an author. I'm just cranking my chain here for a minute, folks. What I'm trying to say is I'm not a letter writer, okay? I can't sit there and write good letters, and I don't have that kind of patience. So this was really an endeavor for me. And I was very proud of it. And I wanted to read it for Congress too, and I wasn't allowed to. No, we don't have time for that, sir. You can give them to all the members. But we had time to sit there and listen to Carrie Jewell read 4 pages of testimony. And also, incidentally, there is a letter in this information pack that I'll have available at my booth, which is right out here as you walk down to the left. There's a row. I'm right down there, like 3 rows down. You'll see it, 3 booths down. This is a letter from Ruth Mosier. Ruth Mosier is Carrie Jewell's grandmother. And Ruth wrote a little letter to Congress after seeing Carrie's testimony and not believing what she was seeing, because Carrie Jewell's story from living with Ruth was totally different than what Carrie Jewell was saying in front of Congress under the guise of her father, with her father sitting there, David Jewell. And it's pretty interesting. Basically, to sum it up, what she's saying, what Ruth is saying is that the period of time that Carrie was claiming to be molested by David Koresh, she was living in Anaheim, California with her grandmother Ruth. And that basically her testimony is not jiving with Ruth's experience living with Carrie. I really wish this could have been focused on as well, and I don't want to stand up here publicly and call anyone a liar and say that Carrie Jewell did not have her experience. It's possible that she did and maybe had some kind of experience. Let me just say this, folks. I'm just one person that has had one experience. Okay? Take everything I say with a grain of salt, because you have a mind. And there's a lot of books out there, and you can read those books and get different perspectives from different people. And everyone's got a little bit of truth. We don't always remember the same way. And we don't always present things in their actual light. And that's one of the problems with being human. Okay? So just make your own decisions based on the most information that you can get. And this is just my experience. I can't give you Carrie Jewell's experience. I'm not going to get up there and say that she's absolutely lying. But I am going to say that there's problems with her story. And that needs to be focused on, just as it should have been focused on in Congress. So we get back on track now. After the health and welfare people came and went, and after these people were surveying us, if you will, David got on a real health kick, and he started to jog a lot. And a lot of the guys would jog down the street in front of the surveillance house, especially 2 weeks before the raid plan. According to the Treasury Department report, there were 9 different meetings between the undercover agent Robert Rodriguez and David Koresh. On 9 different occasions, Rodriguez came down to get a study. One of those occasions, he came down and watched a movie that David had had, and we played some music. And Robert sat there, and the movie was called BATF, Breaking the Law in the Name of the Law. I believe it was by the Gun Owners Association of America. It is an excellent, excellent, excellent documentary, and if you get a chance to get your hands on it, you should see it. What these documentors did is they interviewed a lot of people, a lot of gun owners, a lot of people that went to gun shows and had experiences with the BATF, and they documented their stories, and they're pathetic. Just honest, everyday people that would live right next door to you, that just happened to have their business be guns and firearms, legal businesses, couples, families. How the BATF put so much pressure on them and drained them financially from their court proceedings that they lost their businesses, their homes. The ATF put so much strain on this one guy, he couldn't handle it and killed himself, leaving a wife and kids. They terrorized him. And you just need to see the documentary. And it's not crazy people, it's not fanatical people, it's everyday people that have had a terrible experience of tyranny under these gun-wielding, badge-holding tyrants. Because that's what they are. When you have a badge and you take an oath to uphold the law and uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, and then you break someone's door down. In one case, a woman in St. Louis, an old lady who happened to have someone staying with her who had left 2 days before that was wanted by the ATF. They kicked her door in. She reached for something in her night drawer. She was laying in bed, and they shot her in her own home. When these events start taking place, You got to start showing some Nazi Germany war films to these people and say, this is what is happening. The same thing. History is repeating itself. You're supposed to uphold the law. You took an oath to the law, and we're going to make you uphold the law. And if you think that because you have a badge, you're above the law, you're wrong. And this is where the American people have to come into play. This is where you as the individual, and for an example, this documentary that's coming out I told you about, I can't believe I can't remember this name. It's close to the finalist law. It's the Rules of Engagement is what it's going to be called. The Rules of Engagement. And all they're going to do is show a tank going through the building, and the caption's going to read, now that you know, what are you going to do about it? That's their whole advertising campaign. Now that you know, what are you going to do about it? Because you can't look to your neighbor and say, what should we do? You got to start being creative and coming up with things that you have to do. We all have to do something to edge this along a little bit. Anyway, I just want to say about the BATF, if I can, before I continue with the rest of the time that I have allotted. If you are in law enforcement and you break the law, you should go to jail. If you are in the government and you break the law, you should go to jail. You should lose your badge. No more misprotection from Bill Clinton and Janet Reno and all these people who don't want to see the Constitution being used anymore as a document. They want their own control. They want their own world order. They don't want an American sovereignty. They like the fact that you're on the internet talking to different nations all the time, conducting businesses with Hong Kong and China and all these different countries. They like the fact that you're not thinking about what it is to truly be an American, that you don't study your Constitution, that you don't know your rights. The government loves ignorance. It loves your ignorance. Because what they've done is they've taken your rights and they've made them privileges. These are not privileges. These are God-given rights that we're born with as Americans. And if we, and I speak to everyone in this room because I'm guilty myself, are ignorant of our Constitution and ignorant of our rights and allow them to be trampled over, then we deserve it. Then we are a part of the problem. We are not part of the solution. I want to see everyone in this room become a part of the solution. That's my dream. That's why I still do this. We can all become part of the solution. We have to. Okay, so on February 28th, the BATF raid, and the raid plan consisted of 75 armed men, over 75, closer to 100, attacking the building with helicopters. In the background, the helicopters are supposed to be used as a diversionary tactic. However, according to the trial transcripts, and a lot of the trial transcripts are gone over in this book called The Thibodeau Massacre that I have copies available of. It's by a woman named Carol Moore in Washington. And she meticulously went through the trials, and she talks about the raid plan, the different people involved in the raid plan, a chronological order of what happened the morning of February 28th. But more importantly, during the trials in San Antonio, she goes through all the testimony and shows you where the government agents are contradicting themselves, which is very important to know, their lies. And again, if I can just pose the question, how come if I were to get up in a court of law and lie, I would be in jail for perjury? And these people get up and lie consistently with emotion and tears, and they should get an Oscar for their performance, and they get away with it. How come they're not going to jail? I demand to know. I demand to know why these people aren't in jail. Konyaki and Sarabin, the two BATF commanders that actually staged the raid, that came up with a raid plan that called it Showtime. It was actually named Operation Trojan Horse. Let's not forget what happened in Troy. How many people were slaughtered in Troy. History lessons. But it was the code word to go down with the raid plan was Showtime. Okay, boys, it's Showtime. So the two cattle trailers pull to the front of the building. The agents get out. Helicopters are coming toward the back. They're firing at the building according to all the eyewitness testimony at the back of the building. If you get the information pack, the different forms back here in the Committee for Waco Justice, this girl Carol Moore has put together the different evidences of using helicopter gunfire as a diversion and firing into the building. Admission agents were armed and willing to fire. Government claims the helicopter took Davidian gunfire. The Davidians complained about firing on negotiation tapes. All these things happened during the siege. The amount of bullet holes that were in the wall of the roof of the building. We even had kids coming out making pictures of Mount Carmel and going like this with a crayon on the top of the building. And the psychologist said, well, what's that? And the kid says, that's gunfire. In the ceiling roof of the building, okay? Only could have happened from the air. And yet, it's been denied, it's been covered up. Every agent in the helicopters has denied it, of course. I mean, rather go to jail for perjury than for murder, right? Anyway, that's illegal. You're not supposed to be firing at citizens, and you're not supposed to be using tanks according to our Constitution. Unless, of course, the DEA law comes into play and there's drugs being manufactured. So what do you think they did? They made sure that all of a sudden we were guilty of having a methamphetamine lab within Mount Carmel, justifying the helicopters and the tanks being used during the course of the siege, which of course there was never any methamphetamine lab. David Koresh was so against drugs, his own brother was hooked on methamphetamines, and David wanted to help him so badly, but the guy had to want to help himself. David was severely, heavily against drugs, and it's a personal insult, and it's just another lie that they're perpetuating to make you believe that they're justified in their actions, the death of over 87 people. So, trial testimony indicated that the ground commanders were actually asking for air support during the course of the 45-minute gun battle on February 28th. Now, interesting, if you're in a helicopter and you don't have firearms and you're not firing, what good does it do to ask for air support? What are the people in the helicopter going to throw down leaflets for support? You know, hey guys, we're right behind you. Sorry, we can't be armed because the Congress won't let us be armed. No. If you ask for air support, is anyone in the military? Was anybody in the military in this room? I'd be really surprised if there wasn't. What happens when, young men, what happens when you're asked for air support? Which means, this gentleman knows. He's saying 20 caliber rockets, the whole schmear, everything's thrown at you. That's air support. Why would they be asking for air support? The first thing, according to the raid plan, was the diversionary tactic, quote unquote, with the helicopters, but there were 4 different groups of BATF agents that each had a different job. The first one out of the cattle trailer, there was 2 groups out of the back cattle trailer. One was to go to the front door and, quote unquote, serve the search warrant, which incidentally was left on the dashboard of the vehicle, and when it was asked for later, the agent in charge said, oh, it was shot up during the gun battle. We don't have it available. That's the same thing as me going to my high school and telling the teacher that my dog ate my homework. There's no difference, except for people are being killed in this situation and circumstance. You should get detention. Should have his badge taken away. Should be in jail, these people. No, they get promotions. They don't go to jail, they get promoted, they get raises, they get their legal funds taken care of, while the government is draining anyone that survived this thing for everything they got, making sure that we don't have the money to fight them in court. They give all these other people who are guilty of responsible for murder on American soil, responsible for a Holocaust, with prejudice, with hatred, with neglect, with intent, with maliciousness. They get promotions and raises. That's not the message I want sent to my kids. That's not the America that I want to bring my kids up in. I want to bring them up in a real America, what we had once, what we've lost sight of. That's the America I want back. And then they have this media, this press, and this government has the testosterone to say the faulty patriot movement, or they call it what's that buzzword they're using now? The anti-patriot movement, or every time they mention the patriot movement, they say the false patriot movement. That's what it is. That you're all false patriots. That anyone that goes to a preparedness show or a gun show is a false patriot. That's what they call it now. If you're not with the Clinton regime, you are a false patriot. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Bill Clinton, read your Constitution. You people in the press, you read your Constitution tonight. Come back and tell me I'm a false patriot. Tell me that my words aren't true. When 48 Hours comes out here to the Last Preparedness Show, interviews myself, Mr. John Schrockman, and J.J. Johnston, and doesn't use any of my interview. They come up to me all through this Last Preparedness Expo and say, oh, David, you did such a wonderful job. You were such a powerful speaker. You had so many profound things to say. I was just, and this is the reporter. I was blown away with your talk, with all the interview that we had. I can't wait to get back and use this in our report that we're going to do. They didn't use one word. They didn't even mention my name. I guess it was a little too profound for them, maybe. Maybe it's not what they wanted to hear. So instead of, well, at least they did not print the truth. At least they just didn't print anything. As opposed to taking my words out of context, maybe I guess that's a blessing. I don't know. But we can see what they've done to John Schrockman and Bill Wrights and some of these other people. I gotta move on with the time. I could talk about the press all day. I love press bashing because these people just have no idea what it is to be an American. They have no idea what it is to have some journalistic integrity and actually print the truth for a change. Not print a lie or print what their editors want, but they gotta start putting their foot down too. I don't care who's in control of the media. We gotta write letters to the editors of these papers, of these 48 Hours, of these magazines, and tell them that we want the truth, and we're not going to sit here and take what they're giving. And you know, turn your TV off. If we could get a mass exodus of television sets and get everyone to turn their TVs off, they'd have to print the truth. So I'm not going to get to my story very well, but I have to say this. That's one of our problems as a society today, is we're responsible for the information we get. And if as a people, we stop buying the National Enquirers and turn the TVs off and stop buying these newspapers, that's their livelihood. They got to make money. You know what they do? They would print the truth. They would print what we wanted them to print because they would have no choice. But when we sit back and let your mother-in-law go and buy that trash, go and buy that Star or that Sun or that Daily Telegram, you're buying into the system. You're letting them control you and build you a fantasy world. And you know what? Blood's being shed now. We can't live in a fantasy anymore. This is real. People are going to jail and people are being killed. And it's not fake blood. It's not movie blood. It's real blood. And it could be your blood. It could be your children's blood. We have to start thinking like this. We have to think of the seriousness of the situation. I just want to say a couple more things about the raid before I have to wrap this up. I got like 15 minutes according to my timer. Okay, 15 minutes. I was talking about the raid plan. We got a group of ATF agents here to go to the back of the building, put up a ladder, climb the ladder, throw in flashbang grenades into the building, go in and get the evidence. Now, let me just say that the warrant that they had to be served was a knock search warrant. If the judge allows it, you can get a no-knock search warrant, which means you can bust the door down, go in and get your evidence and do what you have to do if there's drugs or you're in danger of your life. They did not have that in the case of our church. They did not have that in the case of our home. They had a knock search warrant, which means they had to knock on the door, say, David Koresh, we're with the ATF, we have a search warrant. We have a warrant for your arrest and a search warrant for your premises. We're going to come in now. We're going to come in now and search your house. That's how you're supposed to serve a knock search warrant. So my fundamental question is, how do you service a knock search warrant with people simultaneous helicopters coming up the back, people climbing a ladder and throwing flashbang grenades, trying to get in your room to get evidence, while you have another group of BATF agents going to the front of the door with the warrant, screaming and yelling at the top of their lungs, and yet another group of whole sworn duty and job is to exit the cattle trailers, go to the front of the building. We had a penned area at the front of the building that had a fence built around it where we kept our dogs. Our 5 Alaskan Malamutes, Fawn, the mother, and her 4 pups, were about 9 months old. They were big pups, but they were nonetheless still pups. And suppressed the dogs. Now in the BATF propaganda film, you see these agents coming out with fire extinguishers, extinguishing the dogs, right, to keep them away from the area. You remember this? Did you all see this? This is the kind of trash and crap that we're talking about. These are the kind of lies that are being perpetrated. In the BTF propaganda film, they come out with fire extinguishers. In reality, they shot those dogs in cold blood. They didn't use a fire extinguisher. They had fully automatic weapons. Fawn, the mother, and I got this story firsthand from my friend Greg, who actually took care of the dogs and raised the dogs from pups, had to put Fawn out of her misery because one of the agents shot her in the hindquarters, and she was running around in a circle yelping because she was in such pain. Finally, Greg had to put her out of her misery. So not only did they not get a job, then they sat there and let her suffer. How does this affect you if you're a little kid and you're on the second story of the building and you're hearing all this with gunfire coming through your window? You know, I'm sorry to have to like paint this picture for you, but you have to understand what happened there. It simply is not what they presented. Same thing with Randy Weaver and Vicki Weaver. Originally that was presented, a federal agent has been shot. A racist, a white supremacist is held up in a mountain cabin, and he has killed a federal agent. You didn't hear about Sandy Weaver. You didn't hear that young Sandy was killed running. No, you hear white supremacists. So you've got to be careful whenever the media demonizes the person. Chances are they're not as bad as they're making it sound. That's just the reality. How do you serve a knock search warrant like this simultaneously? How do you kill a group of dogs and then expect to knock on the door and serve a warrant? How does that happen? I would like to know. How do you go up to the front door with Koresh going to the door with his hand out saying, "Hold on, there's women and children here." The door flies back in his hand from the velocity of a bullet hitting it. He slams it. All these shots are coming into the foyer. Perry Jones goes down because he got hit in the stomach twice. He's down on the ground yelling in pain. And some of the people at the front door are firing back at that point because they just saw old Perry Jones, who'd been there his whole life, on the ground. They were hearing the dogs being shot. It's all happening simultaneously. How do you justify that? That is not a knock search warrant, folks. It's not a knock search warrant. It's illegal. They served the search warrant illegally. There needs to be action taken against these people. I am so sick of watching these congressmen get up there and praise each other. Oh, to the gentleman on my left, what a great job you're doing for Maryland. I'd like to thank you for all your hard work. Why don't you shut up and ask the questions, buddy? Quit praising this jerk, and let's hear the hardline questions. Let's get to the bottom of this, and then take action after you've asked the questions. If you know that a government agent's lying, throw his butt in jail. Let's not take this nice talk anymore. I got 9 friends in jail right now, 9 friends that don't deserve to be there, that are in jail because a judge was being investigated by the government named Walter Smith that got the trials in San Antonio. Once he got the trials in San Antonio to the Davidian prisoners, and he was the judge in charge, do you think he was investigated anymore? He was being investigated for prosecution. And now guess what the latest thing is? It goes back to Judge Walter Smith in the civil suits that we're filing against the government. We did everything to get him in Austin or some other place other than Waco, Texas. And they've absolutely flat out denied it. And the civil suits will go down in Waco, Texas, the most prejudiced town against us on the face of the earth. And it's just the greatest fix politically that's ever been. And it's happening, and it's probably going to happen because somehow we're powerless to fight this system. Somehow they get away with their lies, and Bill Clinton can lie, and Janet Reno can say that I did everything that I could for the children. And if you believe that, I encourage you to come here tomorrow at 11 o'clock and see my slideshow presentation that I will show. Tomorrow's lecture actually is going to be called Waco, the Final Assault. And I obtained some slide footage, some color still photos that were taken from the surveillance plane above Mount Carmel that day. And you will see the tank destruction of the building. You will see how the government built a fire break around the building, how they were anticipating the burning of the evidence. I believe I can prove that from this slideshow presentation. And I'll be showing that at 11. Also, if you can't wait for tomorrow, I have copies of my last presentation for the Awareness shows available called The Final Assault. This is tomorrow's program. So if you're not going to be here tomorrow and you just can't be here tomorrow and you really want to see this, I encourage you to get this video. And I have it down there at my booth, straight down as you go out. And all this is based on is April 19th. Okay, you're not going to hear what you've heard today. You'll hear a basic overview, but this is all based around the fire and the actions of the government. You need to know. If you got to buy some gifts for people, Father's Day, I can't think of a better gift than the truth. Buy this for your neighbor. Give it to him. You know, the neighbor that thinks that you're a nut for going to gun shows and coming to preparedness shows. The neighbor that wishes that you would just shut your mouth about, you know, what's going on and just go along with the ride. Give him a videotape. If you're more interested in the overall experience, and not just that one day, I have this tape available at my booth. And this is a talk that I gave in Independence, Missouri. And it's basically 2 hours of just talking, a little boring, but it was on at a movie theater. These people actually rented a movie theater and sponsored me. And we have pictures of Mount Carmel and the different images that I'm talking about behind me on the movie theater as I'm speaking. And what they did with the tape is they cut it in Richard Mosley's Day 51 video, so you see the BATF agent standing behind the vehicle shooting into the building like it's a set of a Rambo movie. They're not cowering for cover under all the velocity of gunfire that we're hitting them with. They're standing up, shooting at the second story where the women and children are. You know, these people say that they were met from 40 different positions, that it was an absolute, ambush. They were ambushed, and we had 50 caliber weapons, and again, the press made it sound, I actually saw a report, this older lady that had more makeup on than Tammy Faye Baker was giving this report, and she said, the problem at Mount Carmel with February 28th, as Sharon Wheeler said, was not that they were outmaneuvered, but that they were outgunned. This bullet is a .223 round, and this is the kind of bullet that the government had, that the BATF agent had. And this bullet is the kind of bullets that the Branch Davidians had. This is a .50 caliber. And I'm looking at this, lady, where did you get it? There were no .50 calibers used. There were two .50 caliber Behringers in the premises, and they were not used. Nobody got to them. Nobody used them. I saw them the day after. They had not been fired. It's another lie. There has never been one shell casing found. There has never been one .50 caliber bullet found there, and yet you still hear their damn rhetoric that they threw. Oh my God, Jim Caravan from the congressional hearings, one of the BATF agents, and I'm gonna try to act this one out. They fired at us. We didn't shoot the first shots. They did. We had .223 rounds. We had 9mm. They were throwing everything at us. They were throwing .50 calibers. They were throwing hand grenades. We didn't stand a chance out there. I beg to differ. I'm sorry. The guy deserves an Oscar, but that's not what happened. Where's the evidence, sir? I'd like to see some casings. I'd like to see some shrapnel from one of these hand grenades that we threw at them. I'd like to see some of the evidence of the .50 calibers used, and you can guarantee that if we were throwing .50 calibers and they had any kind of evidence of that, that's the first thing you'd see in Congress. Here's some of the shrapnel we found from the .50 caliber. Here's one of the .50 caliber bullets that we pulled out of one of the helicopters. You can guarantee they'd be all over that. So no, they just say it like it's true, but in reality it isn't. They're full of themselves. I'm going to have to wrap this up. I got 2 minutes. Do we got a question? Yes, sir.
Mr. Thibodeau, I'm John Simpson from Alachua, Florida, and in my ancestry I have some Joneses, a very common name. This David Jones that was a postal carrier, was he a son of Perry Jones?
Yes, he was.
How long were you acquainted with them?
About 2 years, 2.5 years. Michelle Jones, Rachel Jones, Perry Jones. There was Stephen Jones who wasn't there. David, Rachel, and Michelle were the only Joneses of the kids. They had like 12 children. Perry Jones and Mary Bell Jones had 12 kids. They were the only ones that actually stayed with the group.
Was this David Jones one of these crazy postal people?
Not at all.
Well, I was a postal person also.
Are you disgruntled, sir?
I have read all I can get my hands on about this Waco matter. And this book that you have by Carol Moore is about the latest thing out, and I've completely read it, and I recommend people to get that from you. And I certainly think that all people in our federal government responsible for that attack on Waco, Texas, the Branch Davidians at Mount Carmel, all the people responsible for that should be hung by the nearest oak tree with a piece of manila rope.
That's how they did it in the old days. Maybe that's part of the problem is they don't do it like that anymore. Okay, our time's done? Okay. The time's over. I'm going to go right back to my booth, so if there's any questions, I'll try to answer your questions. But bear in mind that the whole way that I get to do this is by selling videos and selling books, by giving information. That's the only way that I'm able to come here, okay, and speak for you. So I please encourage you to help me out and buy some videos and books. And if you can just wait till, if you see someone waiting for a video or a book, hold off on your questions so I can make sure they get one so they don't get discouraged. And then I'll stay all day and talk to you all day. And I'm going to be here tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Man, you've got to see this video. You have to see the slideshow presentation. Please come back tomorrow if you can, because it's powerful. It'll give you just a different insight, a different perspective on what happened. Thank you very much.
Come on, anybody want to come up here? All right, that's it. All right, come on, who wants to lead it? Let Gene go. Go ahead. Yes, sir. All right. God bless the Republic.